Hi, my name's Jo Hodge and I'm one of the writers of this fantastic new scheme called Max Computing. Last time we looked at a workbook, Book 1, Unit 1, which was Crazy Computers. This time we're going to look at a student book, and you'll see the difference in the fact that the children are expected to do it in their own book alongside this book. We're going to look today at Scratch Tales, which is out of Book 4 and it's Unit 1. This is all about stories. It's about the children producing their own interactive book using Scratch. And they'll explore things like algorithms, sequence selection and iteration, we call them the big three, and also variables. Every unit begins with that introduction. It talks about objectives and what that unit's going to be about. Students want to know at the end of the unit what they're expected to achieve by the end of it. We've got the lovely Cool Careers box, which we've mentioned briefly. But again, the Cool Careers it's saying in this is about being a screenwriter or a script writer. So it's relating this activity to the real world. In lesson 2, they're going to be looking at the Lion and the Mouse story. They did look at this in lesson 1 very briefly as well and identified the character, plot and setting within that lesson. They're now going to explore that interactive book using Scratch, and they're going to look at specific blocks within. And we've got the if, ask, answer and equal to block. So they're going to explore using these blocks and what they do to help that story move along. They then get an opportunity to tinker or play with those blocks as well. Lesson 3 is the students start to plan their own interactive story. However, they are provided with 3 stories to start with. They're going to keep looking at the plot, the characters, the narrator and the scenes within that story. So they're going to use what they've learned previously in the 2 lessons to put into this session. This is very much an unplugged lesson. They're not expecting to be on Scratch at this point. It's just them planning out their ideas for their own interactive story. This is the first of a double lesson. Some of the lessons throughout the units will be 2 lessons because the children need the time to complete the task given to them. In this lesson called Creating Characters, the children will explore Scratch Paint tools and also Paint 3D. Or like we've said previously, if you've got another program that you can use, then feel free to use that as well. They start to create different costumes and their own sprites really for Scratch. And they talk about animation as well. In this session, they're going to look very much at building their own backdrops. And again, this is a double lesson to allow the children time to produce a decent backdrop or several backdrops in order to animate their interactive story. They're going to have a chance to tinker with some of the tools, particularly Paint 3D, and learn about some of the specific tools within that. The students are not expected to get to the final activities, but they're there to provide that challenge and extension should they need it. At the end of every lesson, there's those little checkpoint questions to remind them. The students have made their sprites, they've built their backdrops. Now it's time to start coding those programs. So what they're going to look at now is variables in particular. But not just variables, they're going to look at sequence selection and iteration, or repetition as sometimes it's called. And they're going to explore those through using Scratch and dialogue, which is conversation for their narrator. They're going to start to ask questions using that selection box. If we say this, then this will happen. It's all very clearly laid out. In particular though, they're going to look at flowcharts and how computer programmers use flowcharts to plan their stories or algorithms. And we can see here they're going to explore a flowchart. They're not expected to produce one themselves. However, they need to understand how that flow diagram works. They're going to continue looking at selection particularly. It's called selecting the story and using those if then else statements within this lesson in lessons 10 and 11. Again, a double lesson. If you notice here, the interactive version of the Lion and the Mouse. So it's going back to that very first lesson and how this has become now a flow diagram. In this lesson, they do actually then copy that into their own workbook. And it says, circle the part of the flowchart that checks if the answer to the variable contains the word yes. So they're looking at asking a question within their program. For example, would they like to hear a story? If the answer is yes, then the story will begin. So they're exploring that. And then they take it further then says, well, if they don't want to hear a story, what's going to happen then? So it's allowing those children who are a little bit more want to challenge or want to be extended to then take those selection statements a step further. If we think about this unit as a whole, they've started unplugged with the story, they've then developed their own backdrops, their own characters, plot, etc. And then they've started to code their story, an interactive story. So lessons 12 and 13 are a chance for them to improve and look at what they've already done. So they're going to have a chance to share their story with their friends, teachers, etc. and look at, does it work? They're going to be thinking about the audience. Who is the audience for the story? Who are they writing their story for, and what's the purpose of their story? They're going to create their own checklist to check that their interactive story works. It's all sort of self-led, this lesson. They're starting to produce the things themselves. So there's a chance for them to try out their story, test it on a friend, and debug as they go along and correct any errors within their story. As with all the grades within the Max Computing series, at the end of every unit there is a test. And this one's called the Scratch Tales test. And you can see here that there are actually 8 questions. And if you compare these questions to the grade 1 book that we looked at, the Crazy Computers Unit 1, you can see that the students have to write a lot more. It's not a case of circling answers, they're having to copy the code, they're having to write their own answers in. So it's very much the progression is there, as you can see from that one. Alongside the Scratch Tales tests, there is also a checklist for teachers, for each pupil, to check what their understanding is of that topic. So all the content and the lesson objectives will be within that, and they can just tick where the children are at. This checklist for teachers is available to download alongside the digital resources.